Couple seconds. Let me get that camera sorted. Hello and welcome, dear friends, to another episode of our Kirtan London Journey to Joy podcast with your hosts. My name is Madhva, and today I'm joined again by our very special guest, Martin Hausner, aka Mahatma. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it to Mahatma, who will start our episode off with an invocation prayer, which is simply a prayer or a mantra which we chant to our teachers in gratitude and also asking for their blessings for this thing that we're about to do. So without further ado, thank you, Mahatma. Take it away.
Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Shaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paschach Desatarine Om Jnanati Mirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuram Militam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Jena Bhutale Shayam Rupa Kadhamayam Tarati Shapatantikam Mukham Karoti Vachalam Pangolangayate Girin Jatkripa Tamaham Bande Siguru Dinatarinam Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nithananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vashari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Thank you all for coming. Now, the only challenge is to remember where we left off 2 weeks ago. I mean, I have some idea. I think I had skipped some verses because there was a connection between verse 14 and 19, and I think I kind of skipped the verses in between. So I just wanted to briefly go over those verses, starting with text 15. And this discussion in this chapter is coming to a point of what we call surrender or taking shelter. And surrender or taking shelter means acknowledging that I am not the supreme controller, that there's a higher power who, if I surrender to, will guide me, give me intelligence, and ultimately give me everything I want. And so the last verse we read, I'll read it again so we can see the sequence. This divine energy of mine, consisting of the 3 modes of material nature, is difficult to overcome, but those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. So we had spoken about how difficult it is to fully discipline ourselves, how difficult it is to achieve self-realization on our own, but how through the process of surrendering to a teacher, to the Supreme, then we get the power. And we gave the example that someone helps you lift something. You're lifting, you can't lift on your own, someone helps you. So it's like that. And then so the next verse, text 15, then Krishna is explaining, in contrast, who would not be able to do this, who would not be able to turn themselves over to a spiritual path. And he lists different kinds of people. Obviously, one is atheist. Why they wouldn't have any interest in that. But he also says people who are proud of what they know, think, whatever they know is true. They value their intelligence above everything else that we had talked about. We talked about the need for a guru and the limitations that we have, and that's why we need a teacher who can take us beyond our limitations. But a lot of people believe that they're their own ultimate authority, that they can figure everything out. We can figure some things out, not everything. So, and those who want to figure everything out for themselves, why do they need anybody higher? So Krishna says those kinds of people will not take shelter of him. And people who are grossly materialistic, their goal is material advancement. They won't take shelter. And then there's some people who are just ignorant. Ignorance is bliss. They just want to remain ignorant. They don't want to face reality. Mark Twain said it's easier to fool somebody, get them to believe something that's not true, than to get them to believe what's true, because what's true is not always palatable. So then Krishna goes on in the next 4 verses, I believe 3 verses, to explain that there are people who will come to the spiritual path, but not always coming to the spiritual path for spiritual reasons. So he's saying, okay, these are 4 kinds of people who won't come to the spiritual path. And here's the kinds of people that will come, but he's explaining they have different reasons. So then he says, if someone's distressed, often in distress we turn to God, please help me. We want something like wealth. We need something material. A prosperity gospel. There's lots of religions that promote that if you join our religion, you will become materially well off. God will bless you. That's what he does. Then you have people who just want knowledge. They're inquisitive, what life is about. What am I doing here? And then you have people that actually want to know. Beyond just being inquisitive, they want to know, well, what is the cause? Is there a supreme? If so, who is he? Who am I? What is the relationship? So Krishna is saying, people in those 4 situations, they will turn to me. They will turn to the spiritual path. And then he explains something which is interesting. He explains which one of these is the best. And he said, when you're coming to the spiritual life, the best person is the one who comes without motive. Because motive is a symptom of material life. I want to get something. Why do you want it? Why do you want it? Because I want it. It'll make me happy. It's for me. So spiritual life switches that it's no longer about me, but it's about service. Service to others, service to God. So Krishna is saying that there may be many reasons people surrender or come to me, but the best reason is they come to me out of love, out of affection. So that's the highest level of spirituality. When you talk about spirituality, the thing is that, spirituality looks good and it sounds good, but there may be many ill-motivated people, or people who are not ill-motivated, but become ill-motivated when they're triggered by the power they can get in an organization, or the fact that they could exploit other people in some way, or in some way take advantage for their own personal benefit. And so although sometimes it looks good and it looks spiritual externally, but it's not. And so that's what Krishna is talking about. Like it's good that you're engaged spiritually, but there are gradations based on what your motives are, So I'm chanting my mantras. Why? Because I want become famous as a meditator, or I'm in an organization and I want upward mobility. So if they see how well I meditate, they'll put me in charge of something, and then like that. So Krishna is saying the best one is the one who's coming with love, devotion, because that's the highest, that's the purest. And then he says, something we had touched on last time. You remember last time we were talking about our limitations and why we need a guru, because the guru he's further on the road, or we also said that he's he's gone to the destination. He's come back and said, well, I know how to get there because I've been there.
Yeah.
And so I think that was kind of where it ended, right? We were just elaborating on that, the need for guru.
Yeah.
So then Krishna says, this process of surrendering, getting on a spiritual path, not just, getting your toes, your ankles wet, but actually making it the priority of your life. He said that could take many lifetimes. So in verse 19, he says, after many births and deaths, can you say that fast? 10 times, births and deaths. After many births and deaths of cultivating spiritual knowledge, one can finally come to this point of surrender. And why is surrender difficult? Because this is such an important point. We tend to have things backwards. So, the concept of surrender, that's such a loaded word, right? And it has military context of exploitation and so forth. But when you love somebody, you actually voluntarily give yourself to that person. You are surrendered. You give your life to them. I mean, listen to all the songs. I give my life to you, right? That person surrendered. He met a beautiful girl. She met a beautiful guy. They surrendered to one another. So in spiritual circles, the word surrender is not it's a loaded word, but it's loaded with love. It's loaded with beauty. It's loaded with everything nice. So I just want to because I'm using this word surrender. It's like everyone's going, oh no,
yeah,
surrender. Then they're all, I can't take this class anymore. So the non-surrendered position is the position from which we act out of ego and artificially we're in some way trying to imitate God, and it doesn't ultimately work. And so when Krishna's talking about surrender, he's also talking about getting to a spiritual platform where there's no death, there's no birth and death, there's no suffering. So it's a real paradox, because in the name of independence and not surrendering, we're just recycling in samsara, birth and death. We're getting old. You probably noticed it if you looked in the mirror lately. You don't look like you looked when you were 16. And, it just keeps happening. And when you get like 30 plus, you start slowing down a bit. Every decade, you slow down a little bit, and some new pains here and there, some new conditions. So it's happening. And eventually we get old and die, and we do it over again. So so Krishna's trying to point out that's what you get from not surrendering. In the name of not surrendering, the idea is I'll be free because I'm not surrendered. And Krishna's saying, no, you have it backwards. In the name of surrender, you will be free because I will free you from birth and death. So surrender has a very positive connotation. And when Krishna's saying it takes many births and deaths, it's because of this fear. I'm giving myself to another person. And especially if you've given yourself in this life to another person, this is also interesting. People maybe have broken our hearts. We've lost trust because we were cheated. We've had some trauma in a relationship. And a lot of times when you bring that into spiritual life, you're afraid of yoga, divine connection, because you think it's going to be like something you experience here. That's unfortunate. I mean, it's just, it's a reality. It's a reality, but it's like Madhava's a nice guy. And I had a friend who exploited me. So now I might think, well, Madhava reminds me of this friend. He'll probably exploit me. That's unfair to him, right? That's my issue. It's nothing about him. And so we see that a lot of times in relationships. There's a lot of fears and complaints, which are actually a person's own problem. And they're imagining or assuming it's the other person's problem because of some difficulty they went through in a previous relationship. So that actually happens spiritually, that we've been burnt or we've given our life or given something and we've been cheated in some way. And we go to the spiritual plane and we say, no, I don't want to do that. And we're going to talk about a verse 24, which is really interesting, but I'll just give a highlight. A lot of times the idea of a supreme that's impersonal is attractive because then you don't have to surrender. And then there's those boundaries which you are afraid of being transgressed don't exist because there's no person there. There's no personal relationship. It's like it's a connection. It's a oneness with the spiritual energy. And so a lot of people opt for that, especially people who have or are a little fearful of relationships, opt for a spiritual oneness. That's not the only reason, but that is a reason. Anyway.
That's very interesting. It sounds like you're saying that by the sound of it, by experience. You've witnessed this in people, because that doesn't sound like something you would necessarily assume straight away without experience.
Well, and also there's a paradox there, which I have witnessed, which is so interesting. Because in spiritual circles and yogic circles, we talk about unconditional love. We talk about surrender. And we talk a lot about relationships. Relationships is one of the most popular topics on Google. Everyone obviously is interested in good relationships. So, and in the spiritual world, in the world of yoga and meditation, like everybody talks about relationships. And then when you get to the supreme relationship, in many spiritual circles, they want to make it impersonal. It's such a contradiction. I mean, obviously, in our personal relationships in this world, the more they're personal, the better they are. The more we spend time together, the better they are, isn't it? I mean, that's one of the reasons relationships don't go well, is you don't spend time and you don't reveal, you don't know enough about the person. The person is not vulnerable with you. So the more we're open and vulnerable and personal, we spend time, the better the relationship. And then we get to the spiritual, the ultimate relationship, and we want to take that all away and just say it's just an energy and there's no communication, that happens through prayer and personal service. So bhakti is all about the personal relationship. So, but I think the most interesting point, which I have lots of experience of, is how psychology is affecting spirituality. Because of experiences on the material level, we have phobias, concerns when we bring those fears into the spiritual level, that the same thing's going to happen. And that's why the word surrender can trigger up all kinds of negative connotations, when in the spiritual sense, it's the connotation of surrender is sweetness and love and spontaneously giving of the heart. And in material life, the giving of the heart and that it looks dangerous, because if I give, then I'll be controlled and I'll be a robot or whatever. But from the spiritual point of view, it's the highest, because the higher there's love, the more there's love, the more there's giving, the more there's self-sacrifice, and the more that sacrifice makes one happy. Because that's what we do when we love, we sacrifice. Who do you want to sacrifice to? The people you love. It gives you pleasure. So that's the idea. So I've seen it, and I've seen many things connecting from the material to the spiritual level in a negative way. And that's unfortunate when that happens. But it's good to be aware of it, that a spiritual understanding or a spiritual difficulty may be a reflection of a material difficulty or a material understanding.
Do you mind if I just reflect and just try and reflect what we've covered? Because we've covered a lot, and you can fill in the blanks, because I'm going to have some blanks here. So we started off looking at text 15 of chapter 7. And that one was talking about the people who don't approach God, essentially, who don't want to change, who are not seeking anything higher, and what those kind of people are. And then the next verse was chapter 16, text 16. So who are the people who do take to the spiritual path? And it was broken down into 4 categories, 3 of which were coming with selfish motives, 1 of which was coming with selfless motives. And Krishna goes on to say that of those 4, the one with selfless motives, the one who's coming because they've got love or they want to please the divine, is the best. The others are still good. In fact, he clarifies, he says that they're all magnanimous souls, even the ones who are coming with selfish motives, but amongst them, the selfless one is the best. And now you've been touching on this point about impersonalism versus personalism within the spiritual culture, within spiritual practice, and saying that, and to break those down, impersonal generally means that it's called monism. We're all one. We are all God. We're all one. And therefore, there's no one to surrender to. Whereas personalism, aka dualism, which also means that there is a God separate from us, then we bring in this concept of surrender, which you've addressed as having negative connotation, especially with the martial connotation. But in the spiritual concept, it's a beautiful, sweet thing where we surrender ourselves out of love, not out of oppression. And so you've been talking the difference between personal and impersonal, and explaining that the bhakti perspective, which is where we're coming from, is propagating this personal approach in our relationship with the divine. I'm sure I missed a lot there.
No, you did good. One philosopher said, if we're all God, if everyone's God, there is no God.
You know, this is something I wanted to, because, so Mahatma, this point to me is an interesting one. And now I've been raised, as you know, not all the listeners may know, but I was raised as a Hare Krishna, a Bhakti yogi, a Vaishnava, so many ways we can call it, in this Kirtan culture. My parents got into this when they were young. I was born into it.
His parents brainwashed him.
Yeah, I was brain. It's so funny. You know, I used to tell people that just as a joke, because I'm lighthearted about it when I tell people. I'm very open about being a Hare Krishna as well. So yeah, brainwashed from the start. I don't feel like that. I don't feel brainwashed at all.
I wish I was brainwashed from the start. I was brain dirtied from the start. Okay.
So for me, it's an interesting thing. I was raised with this understanding that there's two ways of thinking, the personal and the impersonal, and that there's often tension between the two, because it's quite a core value to the belief system of the practitioner. And so it's always been something that I've struggled to talk to people about. It's funny, just recently I was at a yoga festival. My experience at yoga festivals is the majority of people there would fall under the impersonal bracket. They're more into what we call in Sanskrit terminology is Brahman. We are all God. We are all part of.
Yeah.
Brahman means God. And this is just illusion. And it's temporary. Once we realize that we're all God and we transcend, then this all becomes irrelevant. And I was talking to her about this. Lovely person, by the way. We had a really nice open discussion, but it was the first time I really tried and didn't just fluff around this concept of being personal and there is a God, because I often find it tough God has such a stigma about it sometimes. The word God often, especially amongst this circle, I find. And so I was just very nice. And I wasn't blunt. I wouldn't say I was rude, but I tried my best to portray the personalist perspective. It was a really interesting conversation. And I'm curious what your experience is in this, on the line between these two, how you talk to people who have the opposite view. And because to me, the personal view makes so much sense. I mean, it would, right? I was raised this way. But just in my mind, whatever the reason is, it makes sense to me as well. How do you approach this conversation?
If you had a choice to go in a room by yourself for the rest of your life, or go in a room with at least one other person or two or three, like what would you choose? So I think I can't say this for sure, but I think when you speak this philosophy, it feels better than it sounds. It feels better to the heart than it sounds to the head. Because if you dissect it, intellectually, I don't think anyone will think it makes sense. But the idea that we're all one, that's a beautiful thought. we're all God, at least in a sense, brings this one family, oneness, and being one with the one. That's a beautiful feeling. It's very feeling oriented. And what I've noticed, because I teach this and I've studied it in depth, so I understand the philosophical side of it. And the philosophical side is studied quite in an in-depth way by scholars in India. But when it's exported to the West, and it usually falls within the yoga circles or the circles of Buddhism and so forth. And in the yoga circles and the Buddhist circles, the emphasis is more on lifestyle and personal growth than philosophy. So I think people are taking it more in that sense, that it works for them as a way of thinking, a way of being. You know, if I can see that you and I are one, we'll get along better. And we know Buddhism has a huge psychological component to it, and that people do yoga to de-stress, to get more in touch with themselves. And so there's a lot of feeling. I'm not diminishing feeling. I'm just saying you asked me what I see, and this is just what I see and my analysis of what I see. And having spent time in India and studying the philosophy of impersonalism, it's a highly intellectual, philosophical discipline. I mean, there are people who actually practice impersonalism. And I don't see the yoga community practices it as much as they feel it, or they subscribe to it as kind of a way of looking at life or a way of being. So you asked, how do I deal with it when I discuss it with people? Well, all those things you said are true, but they have to be qualified. We're all God, that's true. But we're little gods. We have the divine qualities of God, but we don't have the depth of those qualities. I mean, obviously, we're not God, because if we were, we would stop getting old today, and we would all have billions of dollars and, just create our own mansions, and our own electric cars or any kind of car we want. We would just, like if you were God, what would you do? Yeah. Well, I'd create a car that just runs on air. Well, actually, if you were God, you wouldn't need a car, but that's another point. So, but you know what I'm saying? It's obviously, if you were God, why would you get old and diseased and so forth? You wouldn't. So when we say I'm God, the bhakti sense of it makes much more sense. You are God in quality, but not in quantity. You're a spiritual being with divine qualities. You're a part of that. You're a ray of the sun, but you're not the sun. And as I pointed out before, the thing that never made sense to me was, we know how important relationships are. So, let's say I want to get you married, Madhava, and I say, I have a really beautiful partner. And this partner is she is beautiful. She's full of light and warmth. And, I just think it would be amazing if you just didn't even meet her and just met her on the day of your wedding, right? And so she comes in covered up, and then we open up and it's a light. And that's who you're marrying, a light. And you'd be like, what is this? It's not April Fool's. What's going on here? I'm not joining a fraternity. What's happening here? So, but that's actually what it is. It's a certain level of spiritual realization where you realize you are light, and there is a light. There is a spiritual light, and you are one with that light. But that's just step one. And the interesting thing about it is, also you're mentioning people in the West. Most people in the West don't have the context of this. They don't understand the history. Where did the philosophy come from? What books did it come from? What is the practice? What is the result of the practice? And one of the results of the practice is that people who do this, in order to actually do it properly, this is interesting, in order to become one, not just as a feeling that I'm one, but actually a self-realized, actual objective state that you achieve, you have to be completely free of all desire. Because as long as you have desire, you have identity. And that to lose your identity, you have to lose the sense of I want. Even I want to have no identity is I want. So it's a very difficult state to achieve. And only, and the people who achieve it, you know how they achieve it? Generally, they go to the Himalayas and live in caves and total celibacy and total austerity and like that. So that's not what we see in the West. So what I feel is going on in the West is that that idea has been exported as the most popular, but the people who adopt it don't understand it exactly in the way that it's understood by the ascetics, yogis, and scholars and meditators in India traditionally. So, and I think if people in the West understood it that way, they wouldn't do it. They would just go, give me a boatload of bhakti, because this other stuff is like way too hard for me. So normally what I tell them when they explain what you explain, I said, that's all correct, but that's stage one. You're on stage one realization.
That's actually what I said. Similar.
Yeah, stage one. And I think most people, when they hear there's something better, are interested. And I don't say that so much as advertising, because it's a fact. That is a accepted realization, spiritual realization. Oneness is a stage. But there's a higher stage, like you were saying, there's oneness, I am one, but there's a higher stage, I'm also different. There's like, you and I are friends, we're one, we see the world the same, but we're still two individuals. And therefore they have this saying, would you rather be sugar or taste sugar? So there's a relationship between you and the sugar tasting it. But if you become sugar, there's no more relationships. We're all one as sugar, but there's no relationship. So what my spiritual master said, that the people who achieve this realization by becoming free from desire, they can't maintain that position because the soul actually has desire. Desire is not bad. Bad desire is bad. In the spiritual world, desire is bad. Why would going out and wanting to help somebody be bad? That's a desire. I want to feed starving people. That's a desire. No, desire is not bad. It's just there are bad desires. So the bad desires spiritually are the ones ego-based. I want this for my gratification. So my spiritual master said that when you try to become completely free of desire, rather than take desire and use it, find the good in it, and ultimately use it spiritually, you'll come to this point where desire will arise, and you'll fall from that realized platform, from stage one. But if you get to stage 3, which is the bhakti platform, where there's service and love, that platform you won't fall from, and that platform is easier. And that platform is natural. So my personal experience after teaching Bhagavad-Gita for 50 years is that's a lot of people just never heard the other side, never heard about stage 2 and 3. I didn't tell you about stage 2, but stage 3 is where you want to get to. They never heard about it. When they hear about it, unless they have some diehard reason to reject it, which might just be maybe that they have a guru who's teaching it and they don't want to go against him, or it's the first spiritual path they're on, and for some reason they're attached to it and they want to reject anything else. Most people will be attracted to it because it just works with our nature. We're relational beings. So that's one of the ways I explain it.
That's really nice. That's also encouraging for me, because it was the first time in one of these discussions. I feel as though I approached it in somewhat of a similar fashion to how you just explained it as well. Different words, but I explained the 3 levels as well. And
good.
Yeah. So it was nice, because it's not saying, no, you're wrong. It's acknowledging, actually, you're right. It's just that there's more.
Yeah, that's stage 1. It's right in our books. First step in self-realization. Okay, you're on the first step. And it's also interesting. I don't know if you told her this. The first step of realization, where we're all one, this spiritual oneness, is where you experience ananda, you experience bliss, spiritual bliss. But they say on the level of bhakti, what you experience is like a millionfold more, which is, I mean, we can't imagine. How could you experience a million? You're happy, and I say, well, I'm a million times more happy. Well, that's kind of inconceivable. But anyway, that's the way it's explained. It's actually explained even greater than that. It's infinitely greater.
Oh.
So it recognizes stage one as basically a stairway, but not as the goal. You know, you get on the stairs, you get halfway up and you go, okay, we're just going to stay here. No, but the room's up there. No, this is fine. So, you know, it's something like that. Like, oh, it's nice here. I like it. It's nice, cool. There's a cool breeze on the stairway. There's a window on the stairway. Yeah, that's fine, but this is not where you're supposed to end up. You can't sleep here. Something like that. And everybody also says, everybody knows that love is what we're hankering for, and love is what is going to save our planet, and hate will destroy it. So bhakti is about love in the purest sense of it. And so you don't want a spiritual path that would in any way try to make you so detached and desireless that you lose connection with that inborn spiritual love you have, because the impersonal path is not meant to, it's meant more to awaken detachment than love. And the world doesn't need 8 billion detached people. It needs 8 billion loving people. So that's also, you know, significant, because if there's a spiritual path, you have to ask the question, okay, if everybody did this, what would the world look like? And I think, you know, Rishikesh would get pretty crowded if everybody did the impersonal, you know, I think mountaintops would be like the latest, you know, places to build your house now. But I have
houses, Mahatma. They just live under a tree somewhere.
Yeah, right. So that everything, you know, and people would stop relating because you're already one with everyone, you know. So it could. I mean, it depends how you interpret it. People may interpret it differently, but bhakti is the fullest manifestation of love, and detachment is there in bhakti, but it's a byproduct of the love. You become detached from material things as you elevate yourself spiritually. But the impersonal path is you start with detachment and you end with detachment, and you never really come to the platform of service and love. It's not part of it. It's not to say that people who take that path don't do it, but traditionally, technically speaking, it's not actually part of that path. So a lot of people who are on that path end up inadvertently doing bhakti. That's what I've seen also. Because it's just kind of the natural outpouring of spiritual progress, of service and love. You know what I mean? It's kind of a natural progression. So, and
I've seen that as well. I've even heard that people often, when they start taking it seriously and move away from that vocational or lifestyle thing that you spoke about earlier, often end up taking to bhakti, as it feels as though the natural progression when they get more serious.
Totally. Yeah.
Mahatma, I would like to just take 1 second to say, because I can see that we have some people commenting in the YouTube live stream. There's no questions as of yet, but just to say hello and nice to have you with us. To those of you who are on the YouTube live stream, thank you for joining us. And also thank you to those of you who are live with us in the Zoom room as well. It's always a pleasure to have you with us here. And I just want to encourage everyone, whether you're here in the room with us or on YouTube, we're talking about some, I think they're really interesting topics. This has been always a very interesting topic for me, this particular one we're talking about now. So don't be shy. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box and we'll address them for you.
I want to tell you something else that's interesting also, because
yes, please.
This brings me back to when I was young. And when I turned 19 years old, I went to university in a place called Berkeley, which is near San Francisco. And San Francisco and Berkeley were extremely cutting edge places in America. There were a few cutting edge places and progressive thought. And a lot of that progressive thought was turning towards India and spirituality. It was mixed up with LSD and psychedelics also. It was all, you know, they're all and people would choose, how they wanted to process it. But the point is that, myself, my friends, others, everybody was dabbling into Eastern spirituality. And I had started studying Bhagavad-Gita, and I was studying it like we are studying here. Someone was explaining it to me, which you just get right to the understanding very quickly. In a few lessons, you're like, okay, I wouldn't have understood this. So I was pretty clear on what Bhagavad-Gita was teaching, that we're spiritual beings, we're fragmental, we're like rays of the sun. There is a supreme being. Our nature is to serve. Our nature is as souls, blissful, full of knowledge, eternal. Like I was understanding that. And so I went to my friend's house, and we're all just being like bona fide hippies, like eclectic, revolutionary, counterculture, just so everything new, different, Indian meditation. That was like everyone was dabbling into it. It was all new then. Now it's not new. Then it was like that was, nobody knew much. And so I went to his house, and I was just sitting. He was doing something, I forget what, and I can remember this to this day. This was probably 1968 or 9, at my friend's house in a place called Marin County, which is north of San Francisco, which is woodsy and yeah, I actually remember the place. It's called Bolinas. It was right on the beach. And he was doing something, and he had a book, and I was reading it, and it was an impersonal book. And a lot of big words and a lot of concepts, and it seemed like really mystical and impressive and this and that. And then I had a realization, and other people confirmed this realization, said this impersonal philosophy is at least in certain, in more traditional books, it's so elevated, and it's so, in a sense, convoluted, that when you read it, you think, this is amazing, because you can't understand it. And because you can't understand it, it seems like it must be a very exalted philosophy, because I can't even understand it. And that's exactly what it was. I mean, I knew the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita, and I read this other book, and I couldn't understand what they were saying. And so it's a very, in the traditional sense, it's very analytical, conceptual models and philosophical ideas and juxtaposing philosophy, and a lot of statements that they just like, they go, wow, you feel like, wow, this is like amazing. And you don't even know what it's saying. I don't know if you ever have that experience. Some people hear a guru and they're just like, he smiles and he laughs. They had no idea what he's saying, but it just sounded good because it was so, the Atman and the Brahman, and it goes through you and you feel this, and then it's a oneness, and we all feel together, and the spirit, and you're like, wow, it's amazing. And someone says, what are you saying? I have no idea, but it felt good. So I saw a lot of that in those days, same idea, just a lot of words being spoken that you didn't really understand. And even if you understand them, it didn't make any sense. You had no context for it. Oneness, this, and we're all one, and then you're one with the money. If you feel the energy of your money, then all the money will be yours. I'm like, what does that mean? I tried that, and I don't have any money. So it's like taking ideas and like, you are everything, so everything is you. So all the money is you. And all the girls are yours, Madhva. Come on, get in this impersonal philosophy. All the girls are you. You're in them, they're in you.
You might just convert me. I might just switch.
So at least that was my personal experience when I read that book. I think a lot of people are impressed by this. I don't know if you ever heard an intellectual speak and you can't follow them, and you think, oh, that guy's really smart. I couldn't follow what he said. But maybe what he said was stupid, and that's why nobody could follow it. Sometimes it is. You find out 50 years later, the whole theory he was espousing was completely debunked. So what he said was totally wrong, but he had all the theory, and you're not a physicist, so you didn't understand. So sometimes I think it can be like that.
For sure. I definitely resonate with what you're saying. I guess it brings out a little question for me, which would be, I feel as though the philosophy within Krishna consciousness or Bhakti Yoga, for the most part, is extremely logical. That's one thing. There are definitely, but, and okay, before I say but, also as well as that, in my personal experience, you know how you said something in the last episode about guru. You said there's two things. One is we see their example, but you said there's also tangible experience when we're with them that we become transformed.
Yes.
And so there's something happening when we're associating with this person that's lifting us up from the inside. So on a similar note, I've experienced things like that whilst reading the personal literature or spiritual topics or pastime stories, etc., where that not only the logic is there, maybe the logic's not there, but the emotion is there. It's bringing out something from your heart that we don't typically experience in our day-to-day lives. And it's just wonderful. It's beautiful and it's exhilarating. However, there are things which I don't understand and I take on good faith. So perhaps it's as simple as, yes, it is difficult to understand. So then the question is, I've heard this before, even within our own philosophy, that sometimes we can't understand everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
So it would be easy for them to say the same thing, right?
Okay. I'm going to make another point bouncing off one point you made, which may slightly answer this question.
Okay.
If we want to take to a spiritual path and we want to know that it's working, it's proper, it's correct, we would need to know by symptom what does it mean to be spiritual? Like how do I know this is working unless I can in some way calibrate what spirituality is, right?
Yeah.
And so I was fortunate because I learned that and I could test it. But if spirituality is just a feeling, that feelings don't always, they do demonstrate sometimes, like you said, and we said last week, the feeling has changed. Like you're becoming a more compassionate person. You're becoming a kinder person. You're living with integrity. I don't want to undermine that, but sometimes it may be a little amorphous. It's just, I feel good. And that could be for so many reasons. You're getting attention from the guru. You're getting attention from the sangha. You're in India. You're free from your parents. You're 19. There could be so many reasons you feel good. So my spiritual master said there's also tangible ways to understand, am I advancing spiritually? One of those ways is you're becoming less interested in material things. And, you're becoming less interested in gaining for yourself. You're thinking more about giving. You're thinking more about service. You're able to live with less. You're becoming more self-controlled, more disciplined. Your mind is more controlled. You're feeling a stronger desire to be in the company of spiritually minded people, to study spiritually minded books, to divorce yourself to one degree or another from the path that most people are following, the path that you were on before. I'm just trying to, become something or accumulate more and more. So I think that's extremely important. If I say this path is the path I'm on is good or it's working, some criterion should be there. So otherwise you might just feel like it's working.
Mm-hmm.
But you can, your beliefs can turn into feelings, and we believe what we want to believe. So right. I'm not saying that the feelings are always invalid. Many times they are valid, but it should also be backed up by other things which are also valid. Because if I have the feeling, this is my guru and this is really working. But when I look at my life's basically the same. I'm doing the same things. I have the same attachments, the same struggles, the same obsessions. Then it's not working. Okay, and then the question you asked was, it's beyond my mind. I don't understand it. Yeah. So I think we talked about that a little bit in the last class when you say, why would I need a guru? Because there's some things you can't yet understand that he can explain to you. So maybe the easiest way to understand this is that material knowledge is not understood, spiritual knowledge is not understood like material knowledge. Because for material knowledge, your lifestyle doesn't affect your understanding, at least generally not. I mean, if you don't sleep enough and you're an alcoholic, yeah. Let's say in the normal sense, how spiritual you are or are not, how selfish or selfless you are or not, doesn't generally have much effect on your ability to do well at a job or do well in school and so forth, to understand. If you have a brain that's good for math or physics or chemistry or history or English, as long as you're awake in school and your body functions well, doesn't matter if you meditated or not, doesn't matter if you ate a hamburger or a veggie burger, if you did some service somewhere or not. But it does matter in spiritual circles. And the reason is because much of the spiritual knowledge, because it's spiritual or transcendental in nature, is not understandable or perceptible to a material mind or senses. And therefore, there has to be a level of consciousness. It has to get in through this level of consciousness. It's an idea greater than the mind can understand. And so it's true for impersonalism or personalism. There are things you can't understand yet because you don't have the consciousness yet. And it will be understood as you progress. So it is true. And it's and that's why we said, you need a guru. You can figure so many things out, but there's a wall, there's a ceiling. The mind is material. How will the mind figure out something spiritual if it's material? It runs into a block. It doesn't have access to it. And so the Vedas say the way you get it is through hearing, because the person who's above that ceiling comes down, tells you what it's like above the ceiling. Now you can begin to understand. And the more you purify yourself through devotional practice, the more your consciousness is able to comprehend these ideas, because you can comprehend them on different levels. Just externally, intellectually, you understanding in your heart, understanding in practice, depth of realization, all this comes as you advance. So it's an important point. It's fundamental. It's a fundamental point in spiritual life. Otherwise, it sounds like, yeah, you guys are all brainwashed. You just believe all this stuff. And you're saying, oh, no, you can't understand, and unless you chant. So I can understand that could be misunderstood, misapplied. But at the same time, there's truth to it. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
That's great. That makes sense to me, what you're saying. And I think for me, at least personally, that's a sufficient, it pacifies me and my questions and my thought process. So Mahatma, I would like to just check in with you if you're okay with this. I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking, all right, it's nearly 8 o'clock already. Well, at least here in the UK, nearly 4 o'clock for you where you are. Now,
3.
Nearly 3 o'clock, sorry. So there's one other topic, which is really kind of the core part of the rest of this chapter, which I was thinking, if you're okay with, maybe for the next 10, 15 minutes, we could address this.
Let's try.
That topic, as far as I understand it, we're now going to talk about actually the title of this episode as well, which is demigods. Now, often Eastern philosophy is misunderstood, or let's say, because it's so vast, let's use the word Hindu here, it's such a vast term. They put they put it all together and they assume that it's polytheistic. Now we're going to be talking about monotheism versus polytheism. Is there one God? Are there many gods? What's the situation with this from the Vedic perspective, from the Krishna conscious perspective, from the perspective of the Gita? Let's clear some of these confusions up.
Are there many gods? Yes. Is there one God? Yes. Any questions? Okay, take that home and meditate on that. I'll begin the answer with asking you a question. If you were God and your job description was to create, maintain, and annihilate the world, the universe, and because you're God, you have all power, so you can empower other people to do whatever you want them to do. Would you empower other people, or would you just do it all yourself?
I'd do nothing. I'd delegate everything.
You'd go home and hang out with your wife and have a good time. Yeah.
I'd go and
I think
chill.
that's what most people would do. And well, actually, if you're God, you could create as many wives as you want. So, that's another thing. Don't tell your wife about that. But if you're God, you can do whatever you want because you have all the power. And so you have to maintain this world, keep it functioning, make sure all the planets are doing their orbits and so forth. But as any wealthy man, once you get to a certain level of wealth and you get a little older, unless you like to work personally, you will just hire people, right? I mean, like all these little hotels, if they could hire a company to manage their hotels and still make a good living, they would, but they can't afford it. But that's what big hotels do. They don't run it, they hire companies. They build it, it's their chain, and they hire some organization that will run the hotel. So a lot of companies do that. And that's, I think, exactly what we would do. If we had all the power and we had a lot of jobs, we would just create people that could do it. And so the word demigod means half a god or godlike in some way. And so the demigods are deployed around the universe with various functions. And they do those functions as a service. Now, people worship them. And the reason people worship them is because they have powers to give blessings, material blessings. So those of you who are Indian or have been to India know that on every street corner, there's some god being worshipped. Or maybe two gods on every street corner. It's in the blood of the Indians. So that's good. Worship is good. And they recognize these gods are powerful entities. And a lot of them worship the gods because they're afraid if they don't worship the gods, maybe the gods will become upset with them. Or they worship the gods as a form of insurance. If I worship this god, he will bless me with health, with wealth, etc., etc. So those in the yoga community, they know there's Lord Shiva, there's Ganesh, there's a lot of kirtans that are done, songs that are done to them in the kirtan world, Durga, Ma. These are gods which give blessings. You can get spiritual blessings from them if you want, but most people are not asking for spiritual blessings. They're asking for material blessings from these gods. It's just how it is. So I just want to say that it's not absolutely always in every situation that these gods are worshipped for material benefit, but that's the general tendency, at least in India. So when my spiritual master discussed this concept, he didn't put down the worship per se, but he said, if you're worshiping for something material, then you're in material consciousness, which is even true if you do that for Krishna. Mm. So that was one aspect of it. But understanding there's a hierarchy. You look at Lord Shiva, you've seen pictures of Lord Shiva and he's meditating. Who is he meditating on? If Lord Shiva is meditating, there's pictures of Brahma, he's meditating. So if you went to someone and you thought this person, like some people believe Shiva is the supreme, he's the God, and he's meditating, naturally you might think, well, you're the supreme, who are you meditating on? And so there's stories like that where these bhaktas, these devotees would go to Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma, and they would say, wait a minute, I see you're meditating. So you must not be this. I thought you were the supreme, but you must not be, because you're meditating on someone else. Who are you meditating on? He said, well, I'm meditating on Lord Krishna. So it's just a question of putting everything into order and understanding that bhakti, devotion, in the strictest sense of the term, is for Krishna. And generally the other forms of worship are or for material benefit. And many of the demigods who are bhaktas themselves, they don't like to be worshipped. They want us to worship directly Krishna. Then Prabhupada gave the example, said if you worship a demigod, it's like giving money to a department in the government instead of paying your tax. Just pay your tax, they'll distribute. Then the other point Prabhupada makes is that you get a different result for your worship. So here's an interesting fact. I don't know if people know this, but at least according to Bhagavad-Gita, in your next life, you will go to the person you worship. So whoever you worship, you better make sure you want to go there and you want to live on their planet because that's where you'll go. So you may want to check out the travel, you may want to go to your travel agent, your transcendental travel agent, and check out what goes on those planets. So the point is those planets are not eternal. Krishna's planet is eternal. So, if you can go somewhere for a week or go somewhere for a year and it's the same price, well, then easy decision. So Prabhupada would often say that you're doing the same seva, the same service, the same puja, the same worship. You're doing the whole thing the same for all the different gods, but different results. It's like, excuse me, it's like investing. You invested 1,000 pounds in 5 different stocks, but they'll produce different results. But if you know this one stock is going to go up double or triple or quadruple or 10 times or 100 times, 1,000 times in the next 10 years, that same 1,000, which didn't take you any more effort to invest in that stock, is going to produce a much greater result. So he's saying that the result you get from worshiping Krishna is different from the result you get from worshiping the other gods. So I think that's important to know. I don't know if all people are aware of that. And we have a story where there was this one person. Many of you know the story. His name was Hiranyakushibu. And Hiranya means gold, Kashipu means bed. He liked to sleep with women and he liked money. He's a typical guy, average guy you see on the street. No, but he was hugely powerful. And he wanted to become deathless. He wanted to be immortal. So he went to Lord Brahma, and he had done some austerity in worship of Lord Brahma. And Lord Brahma said, well, what do you want? He said, I want to be deathless. And Brahma said, how can I give you that blessing? I have to die. So, if you worship someone who also dies, they can't give you the blessing of eternal life. So there are different results from different kinds of worship. You work for different companies, there are different benefits, different culture, something like that.
That's a really powerful story. That's a really nice one to bring up here as well, the one about Hiranyakashipu and Brahma, because Brahma is often seen as the creator. I guess it's Brahma and Shiva who are often, Durga as well. She's very, very popular. Yeah. So, and if I just quickly like to share something that I was thinking the other day as well, which complements what you're saying. And it puts this idea of demigods into context. For me, it did, and it made it almost sound logical, even to the non-spiritual mind. Because when you talk about demigods, it's very easy to think about mythology, and this is just, you just believe this, but it's not based on anything true. So just the other day, I was thinking about it, and I was thinking, well, if you think about the reality of the universe, it would be extremely small-minded to assume we are the only life that exists. We know, even scientifically, probably we don't know, but scientifically they say how massive, unthinkably, entirely, incredibly huge the universes are. Now think about this. There has to be life out there. And that's what demigods means. It means that there are other life forms that exist outside of our small, narrow view that we have. Some of them are greater than us. Some of them are less than us. Some of them hold positions of authority within the universal order. Some of them, etc., etc. And this is just logical to understand when you think about the vastness of the universe. And we call them demigods because we understand about them, because in the sacred scriptures it writes about them, so we have some knowledge of them. And from that perspective, it's logical.
You want to hear something funny? Once one of our devotees asked Prabhupada questions about the universe and the demigods and so forth. And there was something that for her was just unbelievable. Like you say, like it just seemed like mythology, but she knew it was not meant to be mythology. And so she asked Prabhupada, how is it that this is happening? This example given in scripture. And Prabhupada said, why are you asking that? And she said, well, it's really hard to believe. And he said, it's a very big universe. And we haven't seen it all. And we have a very small perspective. So when you doubt something from this little teeny perspective, you have to reflect on the reality that your perspective is minute of what's actually going on in the universe. And he was kind of chiding her. He said, well, like what do you know? You're just sitting here in this one city. And, where have you been? Have you been on other planets? Have you, met any of these gods? So I think that's a humble way for us to approach the mythology concept. Like, oh, it's mythology. Why is it? Because I've never seen it. So if reality is only what you've seen, that's a problem, because obviously it's not. Well, what I've seen and what I've seen through my telescopes and whatever. Yeah, but there'll be ways to see in the future we don't have now. So we can't say other realities don't exist. So at least if you want to learn, if you want to grow and you want to learn, you have to at least be open to concepts which don't make sense all the time. Because if you're only open to concepts that make sense, how will you ever learn anything new? Because it has to fit into an existing paradigm. And obviously, there are a lot of things that won't fit into your paradigm. So at least you have to be open to consider. And, I go through the same thing also, because in the Vedas, they talk about things that we've never seen and we can't know. And sometimes I think, wow, am I just a fool to believe this? And Prabhupada would say, he said, but look at the caliber of people who are describing this. Look at the books that the people who are describing this have written. Look at the philosophy they've written. Look at their level of intellect. Look at their lives. Look at their lives, because they follow these teachings. And then he said, and now compare yourself to them. And then you think, yeah, who am I to doubt a person who's on such a much, much higher level than I'm on, who has intellect, subtle spiritual intellect that I probably will never hope to have. So he was just saying, you should have faith, but you should have it for the right reason. And if a person demonstrates their ability, their intellect, their character, and then you doubt what they say, that's not smart. And we think, well, it's smart to doubt. Yeah, up to a certain point it is. But
yeah,
when you're doubting with evidence that it is not wise to doubt, then that becomes foolish.
Yeah, I definitely have experienced this myself as well. It's challenging. And it ties back into what we were saying last week about, or last episode, about this need to be independent and not accept things that we're told. I feel that. And so at a certain point, and I feel as though, I think something similar to this, Radhanath Swami writes about it in his book, in the book, The Journey Home, which is a really, really wonderful book. And I seem to remember he was sharing how he had been on this spiritual journey for a long time, and he had dabbled in so many different spiritual faiths. He had dabbled in different types of philosophy. And then he was acknowledging, he was looking around at the people around him, and he was seeing how those who were going deep had, because they had committed to something, and they weren't just trying this and trying that, and I'll take a little bit from this and I'll take a little bit from that, but I don't really want to commit to anything. And so at a certain point, it does require, once you have, like you said, justified faith, that you're hearing enough wisdom that we need to commit if we want to go deep, 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 because we're not going to get everything straight away. But there needs to be enough that we're making a smart, like you just put it, making a smart decision until the point it becomes unwise to continue doubting.
Another nice way of saying what you just said, no one should ever think that I'm not committed. So like that girl asking the question, how can we believe this? She was committed to a particular worldview, which is why she couldn't believe it. So if we're saying, commit to this path, there's sometimes a lot of fear that I'm committing. I'm turning everything off. No, but you're already committed to another paradigm anyway. So it's not like something new that you're doing. If I have faith in this, but you already have faith in so many things. And if you don't have faith in this, you have faith in ideas against this. So it's not that you should be afraid of faith and commitment and surrender. We're already doing it. It's just, the whole point is do it for the best cause. Do it for that which makes the most sense and produces the best result. Right?
Yes, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So Mahatma, I wonder if there's anything about this demigod thing that you wanted to bring out and highlight as well, if you feel it to be relevant here, or if there's anything else, because we did also speak about why people surrender. I'm feeling as though, so there's two options here, and I'm going to put this to you. If you feel as though within the next short period of time, we can conclude chapter 7, perhaps we could do that. Or if you think that there's enough here that we should come back and carry on this enlivening talk, I'm also down for that.
Give me a chance. Let's see how far we get.
Okay. Well, because it's 8:15 now. Well, we've been going for an hour and 15 minutes. So what are your thoughts?
Ask the audience what they want. Are they all like tired, bored, hungry, thirsty, or they want to go on?
I typically find it's up to an hour and a half max is a good amount of time for a podcast. People tend to struggle with more than that. So
okay, well, since we're talking about the demigods, there's another verse we didn't really mention.
Okay, that's great.
Not directly. Yeah. Well, we kind of did. Where Krishna is saying, the same point I made, you go to the planet of the demigod, and what the demigods can give you are material benefits, not spiritual.
Yeah.
So you're doing the same worship, you're going through the same effort, you're chanting mantras, you're doing the pujas, the sacrifices, and so forth, but the demigods will give you different things, and the demigods will only give you material blessings. So, and Krishna will give you spiritual blessings. So I think that's significant. I think we made that point. And then the next verse is about impersonalism, and we talked about it. Should I try to get through the rest?
We've got 10 minutes basically, I think.
Let's try.
Yeah.
You all stick with me. So then after Krishna talks about the demigods, he talks about himself. And he said that this impersonal light, this impersonal effulgence, what we were talking about earlier, he said, that comes from me. And and people who are not spiritually wise, they think I've come from it, when actually it comes from me. So he makes that point because we're talking about impersonal. So many impersonalists think this energy, we call it Brahman, it's the source of Krishna. So Krishna is like the avatar. Brahman creates an avatar temporarily. The avatar is material. he comes to this world, he teaches, I am God, but so are you. And then we can all go back and become part of this Brahman. And so Krishna knows that misconception exists and will exist. So he clarifies. He says, no, it's not like that. It's that the Brahman comes from me. I'm the source. I manifest it. There's, behind that big screen is a man. Behind the Wizard of Oz, there's a man pulling chains and pressing buttons. So behind the impersonal universe, there's a face behind it, as there is in any corporation, right?
Yeah.
The face of Google, the face of the Ford Motor Company, like that. So he makes that point. That's text 24.
Yeah, this is a powerful one. I noticed this as well. This, to me, there we go. It's almost the ultimate verse for showing that Krishna is saying, I'm personal. I'm a person. My impersonal feature is there, but it's not the ultimate.
Yeah. It's not that it doesn't exist. It's just got to put in the proper hierarchy.
Just that there's more, guys. There's more.
Yeah. I'm inviting you to my, I have got a place for you. I'm inviting you.
Right.
And you're just hanging out in limbo, on the way. You've come to the spiritual dimension, but you're just hanging out. Why don't you come to my planets? They're just hanging out in spiritual space,
Yeah.
So then this text 25 is interesting because it relates to mythology in the sense that Krishna is saying, and we were talking about this, you won't understand me if you don't, if you don't have faith. It's a circular problem. If you don't have faith, I won't give you insight to understand me. And so if I lack faith, I don't get insight. And because I don't get insight, I lack faith. And then because I lack faith, I don't get insight. And because I don't get insight, I lack faith. So this vicious cycle, right? So, and you might say, well, why does Krishna says, I cover them so they won't know me? And you say, why does Krishna do that? Because he's just reciprocating with what we want. So if we don't want to see him, understand our spiritual nature, he'll cover us so we won't understand it. And that's the nature of material consciousness. It's just a covering of our spiritual nature. And there's so many things we can't understand. Primarily, we don't want to. And so when we can understand, when our consciousness is covered, then we believe these things don't exist. And that's why atheists are so outspoken. To atheists, it's just so obvious God doesn't exist. But what actually is happening is God has hidden from them because they don't want to believe in him. He said, okay, if you don't want to believe in me, then I'm not going to show myself to you. But a God-realized person is one who wants to realize God, who does what's necessary, and then God reveals himself to them. Now, in the next verse, 26, Krishna says, he's describing, well, this is who I am. And he says, I know everything, past, present, future. I know everybody. And then he goes on to another topic about which in a sense, I feel like saving for next time. It's such a big topic. Verse 27. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, let's pause there. If you're happy to do that, we can open it up for questions.
Because I'll never give it justice if I talk about it now. It's too important a verse.
Okay, great, fantastic. So let's come back.
You're stuck with me, ladies and gentlemen, for another Bhagavad-Gita lesson, whether you like it or not.
I'm so grateful to you because I know I only started off by saying, hey, will you join me for one episode? And now it's turned into 3 and it's going to become 4. Yeah, so that's great. It
happens like that, yeah.
We that's right. We just, in like a needle out like a plow, Mahatma, we just reeled you in. Simple little thing. And now we've got you and not.
It's okay. Because I took it as an opportunity to go more deeply into Bhagavad Gita. So
thank you. Yes, it's a nice way to look at it. So does anyone have any questions on what we've been speaking about? Feel free to unmute, guys, as well. I know we've got some very cool people in the room.
We've got like 7,000 people on Zoom. For all those of you on Facebook, you're like missing out here.
You guys are missing out.
Next time you can come, and we'd like to see you on Zoom.
I feel as though I asked my questions during the course of the discussion.
Sometimes there's two things that I think when people don't ask questions. It was such a good class, it answered every question, or such a bad class, it didn't evoke any questions.
Well,
or everybody it was so boring, they all fell asleep, and we just woke them up to ask if there are any questions.
I've had that experience before. For me, one thing I'm acknowledging here is that, and for me, I appreciate it, and I'm curious if everyone appreciates it. But what we're doing here, like you said, most people generally who are involved in this kind of thing, who have come to spirituality, maybe they're into Kirtan, maybe they're into the impersonalist perspective, yoga, etc. It's a lifestyle. And what we're doing here, the kind of discussion that we're having here, it's going beyond, this is just something that I'm kind of into. And we're talking about going deeper. We're getting into the thick of it. We're talking about the real stuff. And I'm curious to know how it sits, how it lands with people, because I suppose one concern is that it might go over people's heads. I don't think so, and this is why we invited you, Mahatma Prabhu, because you have such a beautiful, down-to-earth way of talking about stuff. But I'm aware that we're talking about philosophy here. We're going into the thick of it.
Well, I want to say something about philosophy. Everyone has a philosophy of life.
Yeah.
And not everybody wants to commit entirely to a spiritual or religious path. So they can read Bhagavad-Gita, study it and appreciate it, and they can adopt it as their philosophy of life. And how much they put into practice is kind of like the spiritual religious side, What do you, if this is the philosophy, like this is how I see the world, this is how I understand the world, that's my philosophy. And what I do about it is my spiritual practice, which could be anywhere on the spectrum, on the continuum. So I just want to encourage people who like sometimes come across these classes or Bhagavad Gita and they go like, okay, it sounds good, but I don't want to do this and that or be part of this and that. But that's your choice, how much you want to do it. But don't shy away from a philosophy that works for you or makes sense to you, because you have a philosophy. We all have philosophies. What do you think about life? You're on the street.
Right.
Tell me, what do you think about life? What's the meaning of life? Meaning of life is to eat as much pizza as possible. Well, what do you think about life? Skateboarding, just skateboarding. Breakdancing, we all have a philosophy. What's your goal? Just be happy, don't hurt anybody, isn't it? And but within our philosophy, like we're saying, we're getting old, sometimes getting sick, we're going to die. Is my philosophy dealing with that problem? And in most cases, the answer is no. It's just helping me like exist right now and get through today and not go crazy, basically. So Bhagavad Gita philosophy is, it's meant to appeal to people by having them think about what are they doing here and what's going to happen when it's all over. Because it's so interesting. Like, when you're university age, you have to start thinking about your major and your life, because they ask you, what are you going to major in? Because then we're going to tell you what courses to take. So and what do you want to do? And then you do it and you hit like 40 or 50 and you often think, I don't want to do this anymore. Well, what do you want to do? Well, I'm more inclined to do this. And by the time I'm 60, I want to be retired and I want to buy a house in, this island and just live there and, do, paddle boarding every day or whatever it is I want to do. And say, okay, that's natural that we plan, and make these investments, buy this property, rent this out, I'll have enough money to retire. Not everybody thinks that way, but generally At least we think about the future. And so the whole idea of Bhagavad Gita is, okay, that's great. Well, where do you want to be 100 years from now? Because if I ask you, Madhava, where do you want to be 20 years from now? He's like, okay, I want to be this, be that, do this, do that. And I go, okay, Madhava, what about 100 years from now? Whoever asked that question, when was the last time a coach asked you, where do you want to be 100 years from now? Like, probably never, unless he was a devotee. So it's just trying to bring that consciousness, like, okay, why are you just planning for this life? Don't you see the writing on the wall? This is not going to last forever. And, by the time you're 70, 80, 90, your body's going to break down. So you may not be able to like really enjoy all the things you enjoy when you're young anyway. And why would you want to spend a lot of time living if your body and mind is not functioning well? But shouldn't you ask about after that? And so that's the whole idea of Bhagavad Gita. And one of the problems we're facing today is our society is very materialistic, and it's hard to have spiritual intelligence and clarity in a materialistic society because everything is about right now. How do you feel? How many friends you have on Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. What have you achieved? What's the label on your shoe, on your shirt? Car do you drive? What neighborhood do you live in? And that becomes so prominent that it's hard to think spiritually. So Bhagavad Gita is trying to break through that. And obviously for a lot of people, not so ready for it yet, or it's hard to get through, but that's what it's actually doing.
I love it. I think it's great. I think these topics need to be spoken about, actually.
Definitely. Yeah. We didn't learn them in school.
And I really appreciate how you just explained it as well, the importance of it. And I think I hope people are resonating with it. I'm sure anyone who is here and listened all this far, who's come this far with us, is definitely able to appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Maybe we should rename the class, Everything You Should Have Learned in the First Grade, but didn't. Because this is really what we should have learned when we were 6 years old, isn't it?
Yeah, it's powerful stuff. I'm so glad we're talking about it here, and I hope it is sitting and landing well with people and helping people. That's really the purpose of this podcast, is hopefully we're helping ourselves. As you said, Mahatma, you took this as an opportunity to go deeper yourself. It's the same for me. It really is. I take so much away from these episodes. It forces me to get out of my lazy mentality and try and connect with this spiritual literature, with these wonderful people. And I hope it's doing the same for others as well.
Okay. Well, nice being with you. I guess we'll see you in 2 weeks. I better put it on my calendar.
Yeah.
So I don't forget.
I'll try and message you sooner. So I forgot to message Mahatma until yesterday.
I had today.
And so it was a little bit lost.
I'm gonna put it on now.
Amazing.
But let's make sure I'm free before I made that commitment.
Okay.
It's okay.
It's too late now. It's too late. You're in. I mean, this camera.
August 25th. I will see you there.
Dear friends, thank you so much for joining us for another episode. It's been emotional. We'll see you at the next one.